For centuries, the occult has been seen as forbidden knowledge, magic, divination, alchemy, as well as communicating with the dead. While men have served as the court magicians or masters of alchemy, however, for women, that was the opposite. If they wanted to learn the same knowledge as men, they were thought of or cast as dangerous witches, heretics, and even temptresses. Yet, many women turned to the occult because to them it offered what society couldn't: power. Through ritual, prophecy, or even secret rites, they were able to take back their individual power that society deemed was too much for them to handle. Now, in today's world, many of them are considered heroic and brave. Hello and welcome to The Coven, where we dive deeper into certain aspects of history and uncover long-forgotten secrets. My name is Lavender. I'm the host of this podcast, Vault of the Veiled. Before we get into the Gothic and the Macabre, you can find this podcast on Spotify and YouTube underneath Vault of the Veiled. Now, without wasting any more time, sit back, grab yourself a beverage perhaps, light a candle, and let's unlock the vault together. In today's episode, we will be taking a look back through history and discussing some notable women figures of the occult, who they were, what they did, and or what they did for the occult, and how they were cast aside to be dangerous or even villainized. Like I said in the beginning, women came into the occult practices looking for control and power. They sought out what society wouldn't allow them to have. Women throughout history have been cast as dangerous or villainized for wanting to play the role of healers, diviners, witches, and mystics. Let's take a tour throughout history and look at the many ways women have served in the occult. The Middle Ages were for healers, witches, and the shadow of the church. During this age, Christianity was on the uprise, doing anything to convert people to their religion. Women's roles in the occult were increasingly being labeled as heresy or witchcraft. Any role of women helping people or taking care of the sick, dying, or pregnant, or anything to do with any sort of suspicious activity were thought during the Middle Ages as dangerous, even demonic. This also included midwives or even women nurses, seeing as how in that day and age, if you were sick or dying, there was rarely ever a way to help cure you or save you from dying. However, this didn't stop women as they began to deal with herbal and healing medicine, commonly then known as herbs. They usually were the ones practicing folk magic that was deeply rooted in pagan traditions. If they were seen caught doing any sort of activity involving the use of folk magic, rumors would begin to rise as quickly as they do when influencers say something wrong. Gossip of this would likely lead to the death of the woman. This followed into the witch hunts around the 15th to 18th century, where during these centuries people were following the Malleus Maleficarum, written in 1487 by a German Catholic clergyman named Heinrich Kramer. He published this book in 1486. To some people could be described as the compendium of literature in demonology of the 15th century. Inside the Malleus, you could find ways that people back then would condemn and kill people for even seemingly like they were practicing witchcraft, calling sorcery heresy, which back then was a crime and even proceeds to recommend to secular courts, also being any church or organization that believes in God and thinks witchcraft is evil. Using torture was a great way of getting them to confess, and even going the route of death as being the only way to end the evils of witchcraft. When this book was published, heretics were often sentenced to be burned at the stake, suggesting the same for witches. Many years later, this book was revived by the royal courts during the Renaissance and contributed to the increasingly brutal prosecutions of witchcraft during the 16th and 17th centuries. Despite these times, women were known to keep esoteric knowledge alive. This could have been done through coded rituals, charms, and oral traditions passed down secretly among the generations. And we can't talk about this side of women in a cult without going into what folk magic really is. There are a lot of mixed ideas of what folk magic actually is, and though I myself am not too in touch with the side of the cult practices, I've gathered some basic information as it may help farther along in this episode. Generally, this side of the occult can be summarized into a practical nature meant to address the common ills of community, including healing the sick, bringing love or luck, driving away evil forces, finding lost items, bringing good harvests, even granting fertility, and so on. This practice can also be very broad, forming from many different cultures and ways of living. While many have their own opinions of this practice, it is meant to be for everyone. Each person that practices this craft has had their own way of interacting within the unseen world. It is because of the roles that women would partake in within this practice that they have been accused of witchcraft. It's the caregiver role that many women have felt the need to take care of their community, while as they also suffer themselves from being persecuted for wanting to do what's right. Throughout history, we have seen numerous women in power or control of groups or organizations that have been accused of witchcraft or deemed dangerous. With the help of social influences, even in the 18th through 19th century during the Victorian time period, women were becoming mediums or dipping their toes in spiritualism. This may have also been easier for them to get by during this period. It wasn't uncommon for a group of people to want to communicate with the dead, as we talked about in the last episode. Women like the Fox sisters, Asupia Palladino and Helen Blavatsky, I hope I'm pronouncing those names right, were leading spiritualism movements merging together mysticism, science, and philosophy. The occult allowed women during the Victorian period to serve significant roles in the occult/spiritualism history. This was because they became conduits or vessels between the dead and the living, a space between worlds rarely visited before this time, either out of fear from society or fear themselves of the unknown. The women in the past have allowed us living in the 20th century an ability to continue connecting with nature and the unknown, as witchcraft is being reborn into what we see today from witchcraft, Wicca, and neo-paganism, as well as other occult practices/religions. There wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. After the founder of Wicca, Gerald Gardner, popularized the witchcraft-based religion, women still continued to make it their own, into the nature-based feminist spirituality it is known as today. In the 1970s, film and TV began to show more occult-based movies and TV that reframed witchcraft as empowering rather than evil. The witch became a symbol of rebellion, wisdom, and female anatomy. There was always one witch in every friend group that was able to help out or showed rebellion wasn't that bad. Though it wasn't necessarily about the practice itself, it did, however, show that young women could step into their own power and be smart at the same time. Throughout the generations, more people are beginning to delve into the occult practices. Platforms like TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube are bringing together the witches in this digital age, using the hashtag WitchTalk being the most popular. But it doesn't just stop there. Podcasters and scholars like yours truly are making an effort to uncover the hidden history not talked about as much and giving them new life or just a different perspective on what seems to be kept in the shadows. Now, without wasting any more time, let us take a trip throughout history and take a look at many women who have gone throughout history as nothing more than a shadow, and let's explore their life together. For the first one, we will be traveling back in time all the way to 355 to 415 CE. This is where we meet Hypatia of Alexandria, a female philosopher and mathematician. She would sadly, though, be murdered by a mob of Christians who attacked her on the very streets that she grew up on. Before her attack, they had claimed that she was a witch, even though later on we would know that that wasn't true at all. She was just a teacher who was sharing her knowledge of science and philosophy. The accounts associated after her brutal death were routinely depicted her as a woman who was widely known for being generous, love of learning, and her expertise in teaching the subjects of Neoplatonism, mathematics, science, and philosophy. While we know how and why she died, let's actually take a look at what led to her death and why in today's society she's actually presented as a martyr. While the city she would eventually live in prospered under the early ruling of the Ptolemaic dynasty, it didn't last long, as it was soon taken by Rome and the Emperor Constantine the Great took over. He would eventually command religious tolerance for Christianity. This eventually led to Christians taking this as an empowerment to go and fight back against the pagan enemy. This didn't stop, as eventually during Hypatia's time, religious differences were still in action against Christianity and paganism. This big division was soon leading to violence. This movement didn't avoid Hypatia, as she seemed to be the close center of it, as she was close friends with the pagan prefect Orestius, and was blamed by Cyril, the Christian archbishop of Alexandria, for supposedly keeping Orestius from accepting the true faith. She had also been seen as a stumbling block to those who weren't accepting the truth of Christianity. This was because she had been able to make difficult mathematical and philosophical concepts easier for the people she taught. These concepts would later contradict the teachings of their relatively new church, thus making it harder for the religious figures to try and convert her students to their religion. Her father would be the central figure of why she became what she became. Thon, her father, outright refused to raise his daughter into the traditional role women were assigned in Greece. Instead, he raised her in the role usually assigned to sons during this time. He did this by teaching her his own trade. Using the things he taught her, she would later go on to lead the life of a respectable academic, later leading to a professor at the university. This followed to the Archbishop of Cyril becoming routinely frustrated at her for both her popularity but also her friendship with the prefect. It wasn't until 415 that she was on her way home from doing what she loved when she was unfortunately attacked by a mob of Christians, a majority of which were Christian monks. They began to drag her from the chariot she was riding in, all the way down the very street that she may have grew up in, ending at the church where they began to strip her naked, beat her to death, and eventually burn her body. Cyril, though, had later been declared as a saint by the church for his efforts in fighting and suppressing the pagans and fighting for the true faith. All while Hypatia's death has sadly long been recognized as a watershed in history. Though she wasn't necessarily declared as a witch or even an occultist in the medieval or modern times, it's safe to say that her intellectual independence, esoteric teachings, and her defiance of dogmatic authority all made her life and death a symbol of those characteristics. Her death would later be a symbolism for the decline of pagan philosophy and the eventual rise of Christianity in public life. She taught numerous people science and spiritual philosophy. It would have been easier for people to fall back and convert to Christianity without her being there to teach them. Also, the fact that half of Alexandria had been destroyed by wars. It of course not only impacted the religious spread itself, but also the symbolic silencing of women in intellectual authority. It's easier to convert people if you silence or stop the root of the problem, and that's exactly what the emperor did with the help of his men. Her death to this day is a grim reminder of how often in history women's wisdom was instead branded as heresy, though throughout generations this was especially significant in the Renaissance and the Enlightenment era leading to the modern occult revival. Would go on to reimagine Hypatia as a martyr of reason, science, and the feminine intellect. She was the bridge that would blend/connect the ancient world of rational mysticism and the modern occult together, thus embodying the tragic archetype of women that were destroyed by the fear of her light. This next figure in history is a woman with many different traits and hobbies, some of which include writer, composer, philosopher, mystic, and visionary. The woman's name, you may ask? Hildegard of Bingen. She was also a nun. Yes, you heard that right. With everything that she did, she was also a nun in Germany. Today, she is known to be one of the most well-known composers of sacred monophony, using only one line of music unaccompanied by any other voices or instruments. She wrote numerous works of theological, botanical, and medicinal works, as well as letters, hymns, and antiphons for the liturgy. She has also been considered by many scholars across the globe to be the founder of scientific natural history in Germany. But let's take a look at where this all began/started. She was born into a noble family in Bermondsheim, Germany, around 1098. At a very young age, she had already been claiming that she was having divine visions. This included seeing bright colors and celestial beings, phenomena she would go on to say were divine revelations from God. Now, whether or not her parents put her in a convent because they thought she was crazy, or they thought it would help, is unknown. Nonetheless, they put her in a convent when she was young. There she was educated and would go on to become a nun under Judah von Sponheim. This would eventually lead to her going on to write her first book, Know the Ways, where she would describe the cosmos, humanity's relationship with God, as well as salvation through rich visionary imagery. In this, her writing began to blend mysticism and spirituality, theology and cosmology, portraying the universe as a whole as a living expression of divine harmony. That she believed in doing this all that she could bridge the gap between the divine and the humans with her music, thus serving as a vessel to the spiritual world. One of the more famous works that she wrote is Order Vitatum, considered now to be the earliest known musical drama. Not only was she writing and composing her own hymns and music in general, but she was also known to write extensively on medicine, botany, and natural science, one of her works being Physica and Causa et Cura. I am not pronouncing that right, I just know it in my bones. This book went on to explore the human body and its connection to the rest of the natural world, as well as the causes and curses and cures of various diseases. She saw nature as infused with divine vitality, calling it green powering or life force. Her approach to health and medicine links the body, mind, and soul. At this time, she was centuries ahead of holistic medicine, maybe even being the pioneer of it all. And during all this, she was also one of the few women who would publicly challenge the church and its authorities, especially seeing as she was also a nun during this as well. When challenging the church, she was advocating for reform and moral integrity, especially within the church. Following the modern age, she is now seen/recognized as a pioneer of feminists in spirituality, medieval mysticism, and even early science. However, like Hypatia, she wasn't directly considered an occultist, especially since she was a nun. She did though help shape the women's roles we see in the occult practices today. Her visionaries from an early age would go on to help her later claim spiritual authority, as she claimed they were coming from God. This would later echo through witches today that have visions as well. The visions that she had would go on to resemble descriptions of astral illuminations, which were all common now in witchcraft. She's quite interesting seeing how she worked in Christianity, but her mysticism would carry on as a form of sacred feminine energy that we now see today in many witches. Throughout time, especially during the 19th through 20th century, occultists began to reclaim figures like hers as a proto-occult woman. Symbolically, she would go on to represent a veiled priestess within the church, hiding esoteric truth behind orthodox language. This is not meant to disrespect the church or its history as a whole. I'm just sharing what I researched on her. So don't come for me, Christians or Catholics. I don't need your hate, especially on this podcast. I mean, you know what you signed up for when you clicked on this video. Looking back on Hildegard of Bingen, her life can represent many things, but most importantly, she can represent the moment when the mystical feminine found a voice inside the very structure that tries so hard to silence this way of life. She now is looked at as both a saint and a sorceress with the help of her visions, a woman who walked the line between orthodox mysticism, a line that so few have walked, either because they choose not to out of fear or because they saw no hope for themselves, if they did. Her life can also stand to show to others the visionary, feminine, embodying the eternal struggle of women who try to reclaim power over divine authority, as that has been a struggle throughout history for centuries. This next figure in our line of women in occult history holds a dark secret and connection within witchcraft and holds a strong tie in the royal court and noble figures. She is known as La Voisin, her actual name being Catherine Monvoisin, a French fortune teller, commissioned poisoner, and accused of witchcraft by the king. She was the head of networks for fortune telling, providing poison, aphrodisiac, and abortion in Paris. Who knew the City of Love could be a secret ground for this mysterious woman? She was well known within the aristocracy community, seeing as how that was her most notable clientele. But the real question in this is, how did she get started in this? When her husband's trade business eventually began to bankrupt, she turned to helping her family by practicing a form of palmistry, chiromancy. However, that isn't the whole story. She was born around 1640 to a modest family. She then later married Tony Monvoisin, a jeweler and silk merchant. While her family was living a comfortable life, it didn't last long. The business he created leading into bankruptcy caused their family to go into a deep debt. Being a woman in the 17th century, there's not a variety of options for them to partake in or a means to recover that fortune that was lost. However, she was very observant, some might say, in knowing what her society wanted, which included things like hope, love, and control over destiny. In knowing this, she began her dive into the occult world, which started out as palmistry and fortune-telling. Though it was technically illegal in Paris, it was actually thriving, as many often disguised it as spiritual counsel or natural philosophy. Though this light-hearted scheme eventually would lead her to be a part of a fair of poisons. It's like the saying, once you start, you can't stop. This was a scandal that started with King Louis. Her role tied it together from everything from witchcraft as a whole and political intrigue. By the 1670s, she had already begun to build a widespread occult and criminal enterprise underneath Paris. This is where she began to offer fortune-telling, love charms, and potions, abortions, and infamous poisons. Though a majority of these were offered to the upper class. This then led to her home becoming the center of all the secret markets that she was involved with, supplying to a network of desperate clients. Though not everyone was happy with what she was doing, and many of them began to claim that she was arranging black masses, where she often would mix together Catholic imagery with the occult practices. Allegedly, these masses were performed by a French Roman priest, Etienne Guibourg. These were supposedly performed to win over favors in love, secure royal attention, as well as eliminate rivals. It's actually unknown if these masses were truly occurring as described. However, these accusations did shock the monarchy. However, among all of this, her most dangerous trade was with poisons. It also happens to be her most famous. In this, she was known to have collaborated with both Marie Bose and Adam Lesage, an alchemist and chemist. All three of them had a hand in creating the inheritance powders, which sounds like a cool name until you realize what it was actually made up of: belladonna and arsenic, the two most deadly chemicals in plants. This mixture would have been used to discreetly kill spouses, lovers, as well as rivals. So maybe the City of Love may have held more secrets than we actually know about love and romance. Her role within this group was to connect the suppliers with the buyers so that she could keep her hands clean. This, however, was until clients started to mysteriously die. I guess no one thought that far ahead, especially her. This all continued until 1670, when investigations started to uncover the string of clients and their connection to the mysterious poisonings and following the deaths. That eventually led to the group. It was then on March 12, 1679, where she was arrested. This didn't happen, though, until several of her associates were captured and investigated, too. Underneath all of this, though, was a secret court, burning chambers, created to try the accused. About 400 people were interrogated within this secret court. Eventually, she was in fact condemned for witchcraft and poisonings. Her was ordered not to question her about Madame de Montespan. This was likely to avoid any more scandal with the king and royal court. She was shortly after sentenced to be burned alive in Paris on February 22, 1680. Though her death didn't end the affair, her identity would continue to be exposed and questioned up until Louis had eventually decided to suppress public discussions in public regarding the case. Through all of this and the secrets she kept hidden until society had opened up the secrets themselves, her symbolism within the occult community, she is seen to embody the shadowed figure of the witch, healer, midwife, and the threat of patriarchal order. She played many traditional roles within the society, some being midwife, herbalist, and alchemist. These roles can be tied to hidden knowledge of life, death, and healing. To male authorities, this wisdom appeared dangerous to them. This wasn't because it was evil, but rather a way to show them that women could in fact be independent. Looking to the occult history, she can stand to represent the moments when women's knowledge of the mystical and medicinal can easily become criminalized, and when the witch becomes both a feared monster and hidden goddess. She stands at the crossroads of power, patriarchy, and the occult, where women's voices can become easily silenced, though through this, their history begins to represent something bigger. So in a way, the men were helping pave paths for future occult generations without really even knowing it. Lastly, the fourth woman in the list of women in occult history is one that helped found the Theosophical Society in 1875, and led a life that would later help science, spirituality, and of course the occult world. Madame Blavatsky, who is today known as the most influential occult figures of the 19th century. Like I said a second ago, she co-founded the Theosophical Society in 1875, a movement that had a profound impact on shaping Western esotericism, mysticism, and even reaching early New Age spirituality. She was born in what is now known as Ukraine, where she grew up in an aristocratic Russian family. Though throughout her early childhood, she had already grown fascinated with the supernatural. My kind of girl. We would have been friends in my childhood. Following this, she reportedly traveled across the world, going places like Egypt, India, and Tibet, where she then claimed to have studied ancient spiritual traditions. However, some of her travels are debatable. These stories would lead to the center of her mystical authority and even in her later writings. Fast forward to her time in the Theosophical Society. She worked alongside Henry Steele Occult and William Q. Judge. They founded this society in New York. The purpose of creating the society was to do three things. 1. To form a universal brotherhood of humanity. 2. Encourage comparative study of religion, philosophy, and science. And lastly, 3. To explore hidden laws of nature and the latent powers of men. Throughout the years, the society would go on to become a hub for occult studies and spiritual experimentation, thus bridging together Eastern mysticism and Western esotericism in a way nobody before was able to. While working within the society, she was able to write many books, though her writing was dense, visionary, as well as highly symbolic. Some would go on to say it was hard to decipher what she was trying to write about it, and I don't blame them, because I feel like after a while you might have an existential crisis. Some of her more famous works she would go on to put out are Isis Unveiled, published in 1870, a critique of modern science and religion, arguing that both had lost touch within the ancient wisdom traditions. The Secret Doctrine, published in 1888, essentially the synthesis of science, religion, and philosophy. Both of these works influenced artists in the symbolist and surrealist movement. Her role in occult history is deeply symbolic, as she took a claim in a male-dominant field, where women weren't known to be this educational, to put it simply. Her life then blurred the lines between mystic, fraud, and visionary. It showed to future generations how in many situations women had to fight for legitimacy and patriarchal skepticism. When you look back at it, in a way, she was able to help reclaim the witch's name, transforming it into a philosophical mystic rather than something that was evil or dangerous. Her role demanded recognition as a source of wisdom. She now stands in occult history as both a mystic and a historical figure. She goes on to represent the re-emergence of female spiritual authority in the modern Western world. Because of this, she has helped shift the image of the occult women, from that of fear and sorcery to wisdom, power, and intellectual depth. Throughout history, certain women have stood as powerful symbols of the feminine relationship with the hidden wisdom, the occult in its truest sense of that which is concealed. Now, these were just a few of the women figures in occult history. There are so many out there that are waiting to be recognized. Each of these women here today embodied a distinct part of the many roles that women play in the occult. Hypatia, the philosopher; Hildegard, the visionary; Lavoisier, the witch; Blavatsky, the prophet. All four of these women had to carry the same burden: to hold forbidden knowledge in a world not yet ready for its control or power. Together, though, they remind us that the occult has never been solely about those spells or spirits. However, it is instead also focusing on seeking the truth beyond the limit of permission. Well, dear listeners and viewers, that concludes the second episode of Women in Occult History. You can find this podcast on Instagram underneath Vault of the Veiled. where you can get a behind-the-curtain look at updates, research, and much more. If you're on YouTube, please hit that subscribe and like button, maybe even add in a comment. New episodes come out every other Wednesday, and I will see you on the next one.